Now, as an impressionist, Rory Bremner is famed for his ability to switch between different characters, but he admits that at times he struggles to focus and often takes on too many tasks at the same time.
4 years ago, he diagnosed himself with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. It's estimated that around 500,000 children in the UK have the condition, but the majority, as with Rory, go undiagnosed.
We're going to talk to him in just a moment, but first let's hear from some children living with the condition.
I was in year 4, so that must make me 7 or 8. I can't remember, that's probably ADHD, can't remember.
One day I'd be friends, have friends, and then the next day I wouldn't. So I'd flip out and call them names.
One time I daydreamed the whole class in year 3 and my teacher was like screaming at me the whole time and I didn't even know.
I had a lot of fights with my mum before I was diagnosed.
I was always like put on my own in class, like I wasn't allowed to sit with the rest of the students.
And I never used to tell people. I used to pretend that I used to take my medication and I never did. I used to hide it away and put it down the sink.
I was very disruptive and I'd shout out all the time. I'd always get told off and I'd have to get put on my own in the corner or something, classed as the naughty kid.
Everyday life with ADHD is hard, every day. You wake up with a million things on your mind. You don't know how to cope with them.
I wish sometimes I had a time machine. It's like saying, if you went back in time, you'd tell yourself, stop, you're gonna mess things up.
I'm very emotional, like, if I don't take my meds, I'm so emotional, like, say someone says, shut up, Harry, I'll, like, burst into tears, and then someone says, I like you, or someone says, Harry, you're good at football, and I'll be proper happy, and I'll, like, run around the pitch about 10 times or something.
The fights and the arguments and the disagreements that you have just get so overwhelming. You feel like you just want to like just vanish from like just your life for like 3 minutes or 5 minutes or like even a day.
Rory Bremner is patron of the ADHD Foundation. He is here now. Morning to you, Rory.
Hello.
You were watching those children really closely, weren't you?
It's heartbreaking, isn't it, really? Because, you know, they tend to, people look at that thing, oh, they're naughty or the behaviour, but that's the tip of the iceberg. What that comes from is the frustration and despair of being young and not being able to cope, because there are lots of cognitive impairments and things going on. And it's hard enough for any child to be told to sit still in class and not fidget, not be distracted and stay on task and be organised. It's really hard, but for an ADHD child, it's virtually impossible. And so added into that, you get the frustration and despair. So what you're seeing are little pressure cookers, and the way that manifests itself often, you know, there is sort of anger and frustration, but it's internal. So that's why it's so important to get early diagnosis.
You know that only too well, don't you, from your own experience?
Yes, absolutely. Well,
you were one of those children.
Well, there was a relative of ours was diagnosed with it, and so I then went back to my own childhood, and I thought, oh yes, a lot of that just forgetfulness, a lot of that disorganisation, restlessness, irritability. And well, think about what you're like when you're stressed. What are you like when you're stressed?
Forgetful.
Yeah.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah. All of that going
Grumpy.
on. Yeah, grumpy. Well, all of that's going on in a child. Imagine being in an open plan office, okay, with your computer on, your phone's on, you've got Instagram, you've got WhatsApp, you've got Snapchat, and every time a message comes through, that's beeping. You've got somebody behind you who's got a radio on, somebody in front of you who's got a radio on, you've got a television in the background. You try and cope with that. And that's what's going on in these young minds. And so what happens, they're seen as being disruptive because, you know, they can't cope, so they get excluded, and that leads on to confrontations both at home and in the classroom. And, you know, they can easily fall out of the system. People talk about going from classroom to courtroom. And that's why people think about it being a behavioural thing, but that's the consequence of it. And the consequences are frightening, because I think there's just been a study at Imperial College that Susan Young has done, looking at around the world, 30% of people in young offenders institutions have ADHD.
Well, I was going to ask you about whether we're getting better at helping people. Part of it being diagnosis. How are we doing?
Well,
in that
we are.
respect?
Well, just this week, there's been a lot of concentration on mental health, which has been really, really good. And I think people are beginning to pick up. There's been a lot of work because ADHD is part of the spectrum, which includes dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, Asperger's. By the way, a diagnosis of ADHD also recognises that 70%, 7 out of 10 of these kids who have ADHD will have something else going on, whether it's dyslexia, dyspraxia, Asperger's, any of these things. So there's a lot going on. And I think it's a bit of a Cinderella now, but people are coming to recognise it. GPs are coming to recognise it a little bit more. And I think it's kind of a condition, not a disorder. I call it attention surf it really, because there's too much going on. And in my own case, actually, part of me doesn't mind that. It's, in some sense, it's my best friend and my worst enemy, because I'm distracted and it's difficult to keep concentrating. Even now, there's lots of pathways I could go down even while we're talking. So I get easily distracted, but also it helps me make those connections and think of some of the brightest people like will.i.am, Emma Watson, Robbie Williams. All of these there must be footballers out there. There must be other public figures out there, whether they're footballers, politicians. I look at Boris Johnson. I look at the chaotic exterior, and I wonder inside if there's not a certain amount of attention deficit going on. In a sense, we'd like these people to come forward to help this public recognition that it's not about naughty children. It's about a cognitive condition.
One of the things we very often do on this programme is we ask viewers to write in, comment what they think about a story that we're talking about. We've had an overwhelming response on ADHD, and lots of people have emailed us and tweeted us this morning, so thank you if you have. I'm not going to go through them individually because they all say pretty much the same thing, which is it's incredibly difficult to get a diagnosis.
It is. 500,000. So I think there's one in every classroom. In fact, 1.5 in every classroom. So think of 500,000 families living with it. So it's like a time bomb that will go off at some stage every day, at multiple times during the day. It's incredibly difficult. I think GPs are getting up to speed on this as well. I mean, they're coming to this. They in many cases they're coming to it quite late. But I think people are starting to recognise that's where you start. Work together with the school and the GP to work on a diagnosis, but early, age sort of 5, 6, 7. So it's not too late. Yeah, an early diagnosis is the key. So there is a way through this.
Why do you think there is a reluctance? I mean, is it because it's just genuinely difficult to make the difference between a child who's, I don't know, not coping for...
Yeah. I think,
any number of other reasons.
I think it's because it's been seen as, it's naughty children or it's bad parenting and stuff like that. And I'm sure there are some families where there is some bad parenting going on, but that's in a different league from ADHD. If you've got an ADHD child, it is of a different order. But I think people it's just beginning to break the surface, and more is being found out about it all the time. And it's not just, by the way, people think about medication. Medication is only one of the ways for treating it. There's also therapy and counselling, biofeedback. There are all sorts of options that are there, and I think people are becoming aware of that, and being aware of what's out there, and being aware that you're not alone, being aware that there are many, many people going through the same thing, and there is a way through, is a way that people can reassure and know that they're not alone.
Rory, thank you so much for sharing
Not
your
at all.
experience
It's a
with
pleasure.
us.